Welcome to Winning the Challenger Sale, where we help you win the sales moments that matter every day. I'm your host, Andy Harris, CEO of Challenger. This is a very special episode for me. Not only is it our 100th episode of this podcast launched in 2021, and since then we've had nearly 300,000 people download and listen from all over the world, including Australia, South Africa, Ireland, Germany, and all the parts in between. I want to personally thank all of those of you for listening and making this show what it is. I would also like to thank John Shea, Mike Randazzo, and Jen Allen for their amazing work launching this podcast. It would not be the same without you guys, so thank you for the entire Challenger team for their support. I'm heading into 2024 knowing that for all of our past successes, this podcast has its brightest days ahead. From our entire team, we are honored that you tune in to learn and grow with the Winning the Challenger Sales podcast. For this special 100th episode, we are lucky enough to have Ramsey Jay Jr. joining us. Ramsey is one of our fabulous Challenger facilitators, and he leads Ramsey Jay Jr. and Associates, a strategic consulting firm specializing in institutional sales solutions, corporate communications, diversity and inclusion programming, enterprise leadership development, and executive talent management. Prior to founding his consultancy, Ramsey worked on Wall Street as a global alternative investment management executive. His newest book, co-authored with Ethan Martin, The Mentorship Engine, it comes out this week. Ramsey, I'm so excited to have you on the show. I'm so excited to get an advanced copy of your book. I even got an inscription in it, and I was so excited. And so many of the things that we've talked about, I know are in the book that I love, like all those little nuggets that you've given me over the past months, years. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Andy. And I have to tell you, it is an honor and a privilege to be on the 100th episode. The bar is very high with the 99 preceding this. Hopefully I can not even exceed it a little bit during our conversation today.
I absolutely have no doubt. You were my handpicked, so I know that it's going to be an incredible conversation. So obviously you're one of our most requested facilitators. What is it about Challenger that resonates with you? And your clients, for you personally, I know a lot about you, but I know, for you personally, what is Challenger? How does that resonate with you? And then when you bring this to our clients and you really make it come alive, what resonates with them?
I think it's a great question. And I always like to start by starting with what are the things we have consensus? What are the things we have 100% agreement on for the most part? And I'm a math guy, as you said in my introduction, a finance guy, Wall Street guy. So I always give clients two numbers, 55 and 48. And I take them through a simple exercise. I'll do it in 30 seconds. If you take 55 and multiply it by 48, the product is 2640, 2,640. What does it mean? It means roughly, if you work 55 hours in a week, round numbers, you work 48 weeks. We got 2 weeks of vacation, 2 weeks of family time. So you work 48 weeks, 55 hours in those weeks. It means round numbers, we work 2,640 hours in a year. That's a pretty fixed number other than maybe moving the week or the hour. It's finite or it's fixed. What's not fixed, Andy, are all the things around the working environment, all the things in the ecosystem, the economy, access to information, technology, a COVID-19 pandemic. There's so many variables that we can't control, but the one variable that we know we can never influence is how much time we have to meet our objectives. Now, Andy, I've had a fortune to work with a number of our clients here at Challenger. And you know what every client has told me to a client 100% of the time? They're always being asked to deliver more on behalf of the organization they work for or the customer or clients they serve. Maybe it's not news to some, but I haven't had one client tell me that they're expected to do less. Their clients are expected to do less, and that senior management is expecting them to sell less because of all the changes. But the one thing that hasn't changed is how much time they have to get the job done, which means on balance, we all should probably assess how are we effectively selling in an environment where we're asked to do more, that has more dynamic changes, but we're not getting more time to achieve the objective. When I set that cadence, everybody in the room says, we need to take a look at how we are selling to our companies and our clients, because those things aren't changing and we're not getting more time. Challenger enters that equation perfectly with a resource to help that equation make sense, because it starts with you and I changing how we approach the market, since there's things in the market that we cannot change, or influence.
To that end, empowering and coaching and mentoring, are so important to you. And I know when I think about Challenger, the reason I joined Challenger 3 years ago was I really love the idea of coaching, helping people, to your point, do more with less. How do we help people put more food on the table? How do we help people grow, improve? And so, I know we're going to talk about your book in a bit, but what really ignited that passion? Because you and I talk a lot about that love and service, and love it, and so all those pieces. Where did that come from?
For me, I think it started for me very young, childhood. Not going into my life story, but I'm an only child. Mom and dad instilled that to me. But the real example, Andy, and all listeners here on this podcast, is I grew up by two servant leaders raising me, a mother and a father, which is a newsflash for some. But can you imagine? There are some parents out there who worked at one company their entire career. My parents are two of those individuals, 40-year careers at the same employer, both of them in city government, both of them in a service capacity. My father providing low-income housing for senior citizens, elderly, and those who needed extra help to get into the game of life. My mother worked for the water department, making sure the water that those of us in the city drank was healthy and didn't make us sick. They worked at the same job for 40 years, serving citizens of the community that I grew up in. So I watched what it means to serve people before serving yourself. But I also saw the return that my parents received as they would go around town with me, how people in the community would really show appreciation and gratitude for their service and how it improved their lives. So it was a great way for them to see enrichment by their service to others, and others respected them at a level that I thought was something I should incorporate in my life, no matter where I ended up as I was going to grow up.
I just love how uncomplicated that is, right? That people can just show their gratitude and appreciation. Like that is, I think, something that we often miss, right? To just say, hey, thank you. Like, thanks for what you do. Thanks for making a difference. And even something like you said, like water, right? Obviously a very big piece of our lives. So I saw a recent Deloitte and NYU study. It was talking about uncovering culture. And I know you do a lot of work with this. It revealed that a staggering 60% of all workers engage in covering up their identities at work. And the percentage is actually rising. It's up to almost 70% for individuals from underrepresented backgrounds. How have you observed this phenomenon impacting sort of the workplace dynamics that you see?
Yeah, it's a great question. If we think about the workplace dynamic, appreciating has changed, certainly post-COVID-19, remote from work certainly has increased. But the reality is most of us still probably spend more time at work than anywhere else. And so the notion of coming to where you spend more time than anywhere else and showing less of yourself or covering key elements of your identity is a big piece of the puzzle about what it means to be inclusive as an employer, what also then affects your clientele and the customer market that you're serving. So I think the idea of covering, showing increase, which I know some of those stats showed by affiliation, association, and some of those categories, the key factor is when you boil it down, what I've seen is the more that an organization can encourage or empower their employees to come as themselves, not only do they find out a better cultural identity that's authentic, they find out, here's the big thing, Annie, that I've seen, organizations who really are serious about getting this right, find out that they have more in common than they otherwise thought about. Instead of just using the external optics of Andy's a woman, Ramsey's a male, that's external in optics. And if we begin to cover things that are within us, then it lets us see only the differences which are external. I've seen a lot more companies who are serious about this say, we appreciate the external optics that are different and unique, but we're really more interested in those things that are internal about us, which means we need to know more about the things that we may cover or suppress, which are real identity factors of who we are and what we are, and gives us more of an opportunity to relate to one another. That's the observation that I've seen, and I'm excited to see more of that going forward.
Yeah, I even think of like some of the exercises that we've done with you. And it's really like, you might take someone like myself and our product. I know I was paired with a product person and we thought, we're different parts of the organization, different points in our career, different ages, all that. And then we talked about something and we were literally like on the exact same page with it, same value, same, we really like completely were like aligned. And we're like, it's actually like we're, to your point, more alike than disalike. So and I think that does really, to your point, build that authenticity, build that culture. So I love the idea of really focusing on those things and not just all the external pieces as well.
And let me put this on there for you to have this, because I think it also is a tremendously powerful point to kind of make the case for Challenger. If you think about Challenger, certainly one of the key elements of Challenger is it really encourages us to spend a lot more time being unilaterally focused on our client or our buyer. It's not about us. It's not about me.
Right.
It's not my organization. Not about my product. It's about me having a truly curiosity nature and understanding all of the intricacies of my buyer, who they are, what problems they have, what challenges they need to help me help them solve. What are the things that they're concerned about, their greatest risk factors? These are all selfless interest points, which require you to get to know a lot more about them. And we can bring in the attention, the teaching, the tailoring, the take control. Those are great system tools we use. But at the core, it's about getting to know more about them, a lot less about us. What are the internal things about the company that we're trying to help solve their issues with? It's the same thing we're talking about when we talk about personal identity factors and covering. A little bit different principle, but the practice is the same. Get more interested about the things about them, less about you, and the things that you assume to be true, which oftentimes may not be accurate.
The book, the Mentorship Engine, and you emphasize a lot about this unique platform, especially as like CEOs and entrepreneurs. We have the ability to make this lasting difference in the world. And I know for CEOs like myself or other CEOs I talk to, a lot of companies do make their platforms, for good, very public. But then there's been, I think, this little bit of a backlash of like, hey, are you supporting something? And, maybe you really need to focus on revenue and your shareholders and not worry so much about the change in the world. Don't focus too much on, politics or other things that are happening in the world. I know, as a CEO myself, I often send out messages to the team, about a lot of things that are happening in the world, because I don't feel like, I feel like we all just coexist in this world, and you can't just like say, all right, back to work, so, I'd love your take on this. How do CEOs really navigate this?
Yeah, I think it's a balancing act, and I'm glad you raised the question. I think the first premise is really good chief executive officers are those that have an organization where they're able to listen and learn from the organization. And I think the more an organization creates an inclusive platform where I can share my thoughts, my opinions, my views without repercussion, and sometimes in an anonymous framework, so I can be truly honest and authentic, things that we practice together using some of the technology tools, the Mentimeter polling platform. There are very simple ways to ensure that everybody's voice can be heard without repercussion or fear or how it might penalize them by being authentic and honest. A chief executive that creates a culture where I want to hear from you. I want to hear a view that maybe is different than mine. I want to hear a view that maybe actually is completely in disagreement with me. And no, I'm not penalizing you. I'm actually applauding and supporting you. I think the organizations that find that balance, Andy, then have the ability to put forth a strategy or communication, but they can do so with some degree of confidence that they've heard from sometimes the voiceless in the organization who might be impacted a certain way, but they've had the ability to be sensitive because they created a platform that they could hear from the organization. And then they take the organization a direction that's inclusive of the perspectives of all of their colleagues. I think the balancing act is more on the creating a system that allows you to truly hear from your colleagues and peers, and then digesting that. Ultimately, as the chief, you have to make the call. But I think you have more conviction to make the call when you've heard from the diversity of opinions from the majority of your colleagues. I think then you have confidence in making a public statement on any particular cause or issue.
When you think about, a few CEOs, present company, excluded, what are some things that you're seeing industry leaders do, like really modeling this? Some good examples of maybe different companies or CEOs that you say like, hey, you know what, this is really a great model, and this is what people should be looking for when you're trying to sort of build this out.
I think there's a couple things. I won't name companies, but I'll give you some identities of some leaders and executives that I've seen do some things that we've talked about, some things that I've written about in the book. But I really think there are certain things that make sense. And we talk a lot about communication. I think those really top executives that I would speak to are very serious about communication, and they're really serious about retaining professional counsel to help them improve their communication skills. I would argue some of the best executives, they may not tell you and I, Andy, but I will tell you, most of them have a coach or an advisor. And one of the things they ask that coach or advisor do is to be candid, explicit, and honest about their communication. How does this sound when I say it like this? How do I improve my posture, my body language? How do I become a better inclusive listener? Things that you think are trivial until you recognize that a lot of your communication is not just what you say, it's how you say it. and it's how you listen to others saying it to you. It's a skill, it's a practice, it's an art. And I would argue some of the top executives are taking that skill and they're not resting on it. They're saying, how can I improve that? Secondly, the language they use. I know you've seen this, Andy, but for
I was literally just turning to page 18 in your book. If you can see, I was about to say, like, this has been one of the most life-changing things you've ever taught me is the inclusive language matrix. I use it all the time. It's literally on my wall.
Inclusive language matrix. And Andy, you can speak to it from someone who's seen it, but it's 6 words, but it's amazing how, listen to me, folks, 6 words can make a significant difference. If you're somebody who's organically trafficking in words like I, me, you, the majority of the time, your language will sound just like that, self-centric, and it will sound less about the organization. However, if you're trafficking more on the we, our, us, then when you pivot to the I, me, you, it sounds much different. For example, Andy, our organization needs us to do this, so I am going to do this, and I need you to do that. That's an executive level communicator starting with the selfless position first, then making their personal commitment second, and then third, asking you to do something rather than you start with what I need you to do. Here's what it'll do for us, and then here's what I will do last. The order of the cadence of the message as an executive influences how the colleagues hear and, more importantly, respond to your leadership.
I mean, so much of this is also, like, to your point, like how you position things, how you message things, how you say things. And I think it's so critical, especially in this time, you know, in our world, to make sure that you're really thinking about that. So I've learned so much from Ramsey over gosh, it feels like years, Ramsey. It's probably only been like a year, but it's been like I don't know, like a mini crash course for me. But you know, one of the things that we talked a lot about too is just starting from this place of love and service. You know, and I think that's central to building that mentorship engine. You know, how do you guide leaders to prioritize the positive impact that they have? Because I think, you know, as CEO, especially a P-backed CEO, right, we're constantly getting KPIs that are not about love and service, right? They're about, you know, leads generated, revenue targets, EBITDA, right? So, you know, how do you say, okay, those are my business KPIs, but these are kind of my value KPIs, if, you know, to call it that.
Yeah, it's a great question, because I know a lot of these measurables, the KPIs you're talking about, they're measurables, especially when we talk about Wall Street. And I know it very well growing up there, that we want to measure things that we can put on a balance sheet, an income statement, and a cash flow statement, and multiples for exit opportunities. That is a big part of every business. There's no question about that. I think we underwrite that, though, with the reality that every business at the end of the day is going to be driven by some semblance of an HR, human resource apparatus. So when you start thinking about what we're trying to do as an organization, the system, the strategy, all the things that we're doing from a measurable standpoint, ultimately it will be a direct derivative of how well the people within the organization adopt, adapt, and apply whatever the strategy is for growth and expansion. Now, we can further understand that when we think about one of the models we talk about in the Mentorship Engine, we talk about recruiting, we talk about retention, we talk about promotion. A lot of organizations are pretty good at the first one, recruit, get a lot of talent in the door. When you start asking them about their recruiting strategy, Andy, they'll tell you up and down, side to side, go brain damage because of how depth there is. Then I say this, Andy, talk to me about your retention strategy. The volume decreases. I start looking around. There's no real concrete strategic plan there like there is on the recruiting side, which then by definition impairs the promotion aspect. You can't recruit great talent and then not retain it. Then it affects the promotability. And you think about the time horizon of an organization, one that all will probably tell you, it's about great talent at the senior level that's driving strategy. Ultimately, it's about how do you groom generation leaders to take on new divisions, new departments, new markets, new products. Ultimately, that'll take new people at some point in time if there's growth and expansion. So KPIs to me are great, but they're going to be a derivative of the people. And what you find, and if you listen to your people, they want to be a part of an organization where some of these intangibles, love, service, care, are important to them. That will further increase your ability to retain them if it's part of your strategic plan in recruiting them. You then have a retention plan of how that incorporates once they're there at the organization. So I think it's part of the model of retaining great talent, love and service and care. That is what your employees care about, in addition to the remuneration packages, which everybody cares about. I think you'll also find they also care about those intangibles: love, service, care, impacting community. Those things matter to employees as much. And that will be a big factor of retaining great talent. Once you recruit it, then you can promote it to work with you at the C-suite level as the organization grows and expands in the future.
I always talk to leaders and they're like, oh, we do a great job, getting diverse talent. I'm a woman that people are like, oh, we're going to get more women in this organization. And then the inclusivity part of that is that they don't, to your point, retain you. They don't keep you. They spend all this money to recruit you, and then then you don't feel like you're part of the team, and you don't get that love and that service. And then you leave, right? And then it's like the spiral starts all over, the circle starts all over again, right?
I always tell our clients, DTM, do the math. If you don't like the feel of it, then let's take out the spreadsheet and do the math. And to your point, Andy, it is significantly more expensive to recruit again than to retain and promote from within. The math is clear that is significantly better on the P&L if you can retain that talent rather than recruit it, train it up, and then it goes across the street and takes your skill training and applies it to compete and beat you. Yeah. So it also measures out in the P&L when we look at retention, labor cost, errors and redundancy from someone not as skilled coming into the organization, knowledge transfer when someone leaves who's been inside for 10 to 15 years. These are all factors that do show up on the P&L. So there is a KPI derivative that shows up, and usually it's rather punitive rather than retaining that great talent once you brought it inside.
A lot of people that listen to this podcast are sales leaders, and they might be saying, yeah, these stories are great. They're so inspirational, but I'm just a sales leader. I'm not the CEO. And how do I make that impact? How do I bring this to my organization? I'm not the leader, or, I'm not at the senior level. So, how do people do this regardless of role or title?
It's a great question. And I always say this, and one of the things I'll ask all of our clients here at Challenger, and you'll appreciate this, Andy, we'll have a room full of colleagues from another firm, and then we're working on them on a training workshop. And the first thing I'll ask is, I'll put up a slide and I'll say, are you in sales? Are you in sales? Are you in sales? There's only 3 options, by the way. So everybody kind of is confused with which one am I supposed to pick? It doesn't matter which one you pick because we're all in it.
We're all in sales, right?
At the beginning, I don't care if you're the person at the front door, the person upstairs, downstairs, IT, front office, back office. The premise we're suggesting is everybody's in the benefit of representing the organization. And therefore, every phone call they make, every email they send, every conversation they have is representative of the organization. And that increases the sales potential of the organization when you recognize that everything you do impacts somewhere in the organization, its ability to sell itself, promote itself to the marketplace. So I start with that premise. No matter who you are in the organization, first of all, you're in sales.
Right.
Once we get that agreement, then we start to have the ability to say, let me talk to you about how your role impacts who you thought was just in sales, or who you thought the sales leader is, who might be, or the CEO. You start seeing how there's an interdependent nature with every role within the organization. And the bigger the organization, Andy, the more you see, if a lot of us think that we don't make a difference, you start to see how big of a difference it makes.
Right, absolutely.
Let me repeat that for somebody. If a lot of people in the organization believe that their contributions are insignificant to the organization's sales potential, it begins to be a seismic impact on the organization's sales potential. If everybody says, you know what, my little bit matters, and so do the other 1,000 of us, then you can see how it has a seismic impact on success. So the thing I tell everyone, no matter what level they are in the organization, is every incremental contribution to positively increase our brand, our recognition, our promotability, then the more positive impact we have as an organization. If a lot of us believe that, the organization will ultimately benefit significantly by doing that. And that's the premise I strike from the first question I ask. And then I remind them at the end, what are you in? And everybody then says, sales. And that makes a difference going forward.
Well, one of my favorite questions people ask me often is, how, I came up through sales, and people are like, how did you transition from being in sales to being a CEO? And I'm like, no, I'm still in sales. I never transitioned out of sales, just so we're clear.
So true. 100%. Right answer.
What are some things you're seeing and you're really paying attention to for 2024? Obviously, in your book, I'm going to show it again, the Mentorship Engine. You have a lot of things that make sense around goals and around really making sure that you're communicating with your teams. And there's so much good information in there. But what are other things that you're really focused on from a 2024 perspective?
I'll tell you this, and this is a shameless cheat code, but I'm back on my time thing, Andy. I'm back on the, what are the
Yep.
measurables? And so I say to people, look, the year roughly, again, depending on if you count today or not, roughly 27 days left in 2023, by the way, as we're recording this podcast. But that includes, Andy, weekends. It also includes what some would consider to be holidays of significance. Now, some of us celebrate certain others, so it incorporates that to a degree. So I always say to people, be careful about understanding how much time we have. And so there's 27 days, if you will. But if you strip away the weekends and some of the holidays that we know are of record, it's really more in the 15 to 16 category. And so you start realizing there's roughly 2 weeks, if you will, of actual business days. Now, what I suggest, if you want to have pipeline and fidelity management of relationships and deadlines, don't operate like you have 27 days. Operate like you have 12 to 15. But if you use that same philosophy in the year when it starts again, it changes how you prioritize internal and external objectives. It gives you greater pipeline fidelity management, I call it. And what I think real good sales leaders are doing now is the principle of the musical instrument. If everybody knows an accordion, you squeeze it and expand it, you squeeze it and expand it. I will tell every sales leader that's listening to your podcast, they should be applying an accordion principle to their pipeline through their sales leaders, squeezing it and expanding it. What am I saying, Andy? Which is counter to some premise. The pipeline should never just be statically full.
Right.
Accordion, squeeze and expand, squeeze and expand, and using the dates of how many days we have to close to quarter in changes the way you prioritize your pipeline internally and also externally with your clientele. I think sales leaders who are conscientious of that and using an accordion feature to their pipeline as they look and navigate tend to have much greater success, not only to the end of this year, but in the years to come using that same principle. I want to say one more thing about the Mentorship Engine, the book, because I think it also dovetails into some of this conversation we're having. There's a model that we talk a lot about, and it's an 8x3 matrix. It's an ABF matrix, and the A stands for above, the B stands for beside, and the F stands for following. So what we're basically telling all of us, Andy, from positions of leadership, no matter where we are in the organization, if you're conscientious in making sure you're building a network of colleagues and peers in your organization, in the industry, of those who are, quote unquote, above you, that's really good. But you're really great if you have that network intentionally built with those above you, those that are beside you, and then, those that are following you. And sometimes if we're not honest, we can overweight one of those and we actually neglect the other two. And the great leaders and mentors of organizations of tomorrow are thoughtfully thinking about above, thoughtfully also who's next to me, and oh, by the way, who's behind me. Because as you go higher, guess who you become more dependent on? Those that are following. So don't wait till you get there and then say, hey, let me come. No. As you're making your way, be conscientious of that. So no matter where you're in your journey, I will challenge everybody to think about their version of that ABF matrix and be intentional in making sure it's equitably being built. And you'll find as your career moves forward and your responsibility increases, so too will those who are excited to follow your leadership.
Ramsey, this was amazing. This was so awesome. Before we wrap up, what's the best way for our listeners to connect with you?
Yeah, thank you for the question. LinkedIn is your primary number one, and it's Ramsey Jay Jr. on LinkedIn. The good news is there's only one. My father's not on LinkedIn, so you won't accidentally find him, but it's Ramsey on LinkedIn. So that's probably the best thing. And number two, those who are interested in the book or the resources, we have a website. It's just the title of the book. There it is right there. Mentorship Engine. So it looks just like that. The website looks just like that. So it's just mentorshipengine.com. And for all of our listeners today, we always want to give to that position of service and love. We practice what we preach. There's a free assessment on there for you to kind of have an opportunity to assess your own leadership and mentorship style. And it's free. We don't want anything from you. We want to practice that posture of giving and giving and giving. So if that's of interest to you, that's a free resource to you. And you can also download the first chapter of the book if that's interesting for you. And then, of course, if you get more excited, then Amazon certainly will get it to you in 24 hours.
Yeah, I was going to say, Jeff Bezos isn't going to let you get away with that.
Shameless plug on all three levels. But at the end of the day, all jokes aside, Ethan and I wrote this as a tool to give to others, and we certainly think it'll add value to those who really give it an opportunity to penetrate their leadership style.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for being on the show. Obviously, huge gratitude for you and everything you've done to help me this year and my career. So I immensely, overcome with all that you've contributed. So, and to our listeners, thank you for being part of this 100th episode. We look forward to keeping this momentum going. And if you're yet to follow the podcast, be sure to do that so you never miss an episode. We'll be back next week with our final episode of the year, featuring Nader Pishtad, one of our executive advisors at Challenger. He's going to be doing a fantastic look back, and thank you everyone for being part of this incredible journey. 100 episodes is definitely a milestone for me. So Ramsey, glad I could share it with you. And once again, thanks to everyone for listening.
Thank you for having me, and here's to 100 more.